Hello and welcome everyone. So far in this course, we have used Web Application Factory for all the integration testing needs in ASP.NET Core. So there is another alternative for testing in ASP.NET application, of course, including ASP.NET Core. Present version is 8. And this is to use in-memory test server hosting with TestServer from Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.TestHost package. Okay, so just a quick recap. We have learned that integration testing so far ensures different parts of the application work together correctly. And in ASP.NET Core, integration testing tools include Web Application Factory and TestServer. So in this lecture, I am going to consider both the methods and see when one suits better than the other, or if both of them can work together in the same project. Okay, so let's see what are the test server. Now the test server can be used if you need more control over the server's lifecycle, or if you are testing lower level isolated components of the application. And so far we have used Web Application Factory, and that is very suitable for end-to-end or integration tests that involve the full ASP.NET Core request pipelines, which we have seen. And it is also preferred when dealing with dependency injection, authentication, or middleware setups, as it helps create a more production-like environment. So that is obviously more desirable even for courses like Udemy, where students come from all over the industry also, and some are highly established practitioners besides students. So this is a practical hands-on experience that I'm going to deliver in this lecture through building a project and showing you how Web Application Factory and TestServer both can reside in a symbiotic relationship in the same project. So let's switch over to Visual Studio, flip over to Visual Studio and create an ASP.NET Core empty project. So I give it a name. It came to my mind as being very meaningful or self-explanatory. You could give it another name, like what I have given is Integration Testing Strategies Demo. Okay, and then click on Next and configure for HTTPS. I don't need enable container support, and all of these will remain unchecked, and then create. Now my project is in front of me, and the first thing that I will do is to change my program file, program class, and I will make it suitable for my application, present application. Now I will be next steps. I'll be creating a controller, API controller, values controller. But before that, I'm mapping to the values controller, /API/ /values, new value 1, value 2. And the value with ID will return the value with that ID. Okay, if the ID is 1 for value 1, so if I query on the request with an ID 1, then it will bring up value 1. And if ID is 2, corresponding to value 2, then it will, if the request is such that the ID is passed as 2, then it will bring the value 2 as the response. All right. Next is I will add a sample values controller. So right clicking on the project node and click on add new item. So look for controller, API controller, empty. Okay, click on this. Now the template code is written for me. So I'll change this template code with what I have on my clipboard. So using Microsoft.ASP.NET and system.collections.generic is not used. That's why it is grayed. And route is API controller public class. This is the attribute, and values controller derives from controller base HTTP GET request I action result type with IEnumerable type string. It gets value 1, value 2. It returns a new string, and with HTTP GET with an ID and having ID passed into the parameter of the GET method, it returns a value with ID. Okay. Next, we add the necessary packages, NuGet packages to our project for working with the Web Application Factory first, and then I will take the test server, because Web Application Factory we have already taken throughout this course, and it will be just a recap and refresher. So first is .NET add package, Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.Testing, and we also need the XUnit test package. Alright, so this time I'm going to issue command rather than using the NuGet package manager, which we have already done. So let's switch over to Visual Studio again and click on Tools and command line, developer command prompt or developer PowerShell, anyone I could use to issue these two commands. Okay, so warning, we are about to paste text. That's fine, paste anyway. So couldn't find any project. Okay, let's see. So let me click on Tools again and command line, developer command prompt. Now I'll have to cd to this directory. This is in a separate directory. So I have to cd to integration test strategies demo directory within this upper level root level directory. So cd to cd integration testing strategies demo. You need to be very careful about the typo, because it will waste a lot of time otherwise. So now let me issue these two commands. Paste anyway, and now yes. Now the next package is add XUnit. So I think all hunky dory. Everything is added. Now we can test it by double clicking the project file, and it will be the package reference include Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.Testing and XUnit framework. That's all we needed. So let's see what is in the next slide. So we here Web Application Factory example. So you are already familiar with most of this code. So I create for this test, this lecture, I created another demo project which I have run through initially, and I will create public class myAPI_test, which derives from, which is a child class from iClass fixture. This is the interface with Web Application Factory program, and this is the code, private read-only variable HTTP client underscore client and public myAPI_test constructor with dependency injection. So that client will be initialized with factory.createClient by calling the createClient method of the factory object. Okay. Next is the test. Public async task get endpoint, just one test I will create, and I will run this test for both the test server as well as the Web Application Factory to tell you that both work with our setup. Okay. Arrange act as such. So our URL /API/value. So adjust endpoint as per your app. So my endpoint I have already defined through the previous built in the previous lecture, our values controller. Okay, we will call that in due course of time. Var responsive await client dot get async URL using this client HTTP client, and assert is response dot ensure successful status code, and then content is await response dot contain dot read as string async. So we put it in the content variable and then assert.null content. If the content is not null, the test will pass. So we'll switch over to our good old project and create this file. So as per the code in the slideshow, it is this one, public class myAPI_test. So I will build the myAPI_test and paste the code, full code of this class, as well as the fact test, that XUnit test. Okay. So now you are sufficiently familiar with this fact attribute and this iClass fixture interface. So I guess we can move forward. So I will create a class. Add class and name this myAPI_test. Okay, and then I'll write it over. Namespace is alright. So on adding this constructor in the myAPI_tests file, it comes up with this error: inconsistent accessibility parameter, type WebApplicationFactory with T entry point being program. This says that this is less accessible than method myAPI_test.myAPI_test, that is this constructor. This program is less program class, whatever program class is this is less accessible than this public constructor. So what happens is, why it does so, that because we are using minimal API. Now in minimal API setup, you can add a separate partial program class to satisfy the web application factory generic requirement. Because what happens that this program class, even though it is a program.cs file, it doesn't explicitly exist as a class with a public modifier. Since there is no public class program by default in minimal APIs, this leads to an accessibility issues when using web application factory with program in our test class like such. So what I did, how to mitigate, what is the solution to solve this issue? So what I need to do is, I created another class, name it any class, class.cs or testclass.cs or test.cs, and then created a public partial class program to satisfy the needs of minimal API. Now, once I do this, see, this red line has vanished. Now, if I click on Ctrl+Shift+B to build, it will build successfully. Okay, once succeeded. So this is the alleviation of this problem. Okay. Now let's see how to explain Web Application Factory. So Web Application Factory program is used to bootstrap the app, and create client creates a client to perform HTTP requests against the application. So this approach makes it easy to set up and test endpoints with minimal configuration. So we have already seen all of these things. So this is Web Application Factory with program as T entity or type of this entity class, which is program class. It is set to bootstrap the application, and then what was the next point was create client creates a client to perform HTTP requests against the application. So it creates an HTTP request because it's a type HTTP client. Okay, now the next thing is, okay, this approach makes it easy to set up and test endpoints with minimal configuration. Having known this, let's see the test server overview. So test server is used to host a test version of the ASP.NET Core application. It is suitable for lightweight testing, as we have already talked in the beginning. Now, test server as an alternative for testing. Test server is used for host a test version of the ASP.NET Core application. It is suitable for lightweight testing, especially where customization of the app pipeline is required. So for using test server, we add this necessary NuGet packages. We already had the NuGet packages for XUnit, so that's no more required, but we will have to add this .NET add package Microsoft .ASP.NET Core.test-host. So I have changed directory to my current directory for this project, integration testing strategies demo, and then I'll add this NuGet package. So this NuGet package will be added in a few seconds, and let's see this overview. So test host is also there as in tandem with MVC.testing, which was used for the web application factory. We have got the test host factory. Now this was my test.cs class. We add a similar class. So let's see this test server example in PowerPoint slideshow, and then we'll do it on the Visual Studio with actual hands-on exercise. So these are the libraries to be used using .NET, .http, system.train.task, system Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.hosting, and Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.test-host using XUnit public class my API test with test server. Okay, so again we create read-only variable HTTP client underscore client, and then on this public constructor we initialize a builder object new web host builder .use startup, replace with your startup class. So we'll replace it, and then because my startup class will be program class, I will replace it in actual code as program. Okay, and test server is new test server, and I pass this builder object, and then client is test server and dot create client. So call the create client method of the test server object. Okay, and then the fact is the same test arrange act assert. So there is no change. The basic idea is to actually keep it simple and at the same time check the two testing strategies with the same test. Okay, so let's get back to the Visual Studio coding, Visual Studio 2022 once again. So as before, I add a class file my API test with test server, and it will create a public class my API test with test server, and I will post this code, or rather paste this code. Okay, so get rid of this and bring it above because it has got all heavier because I have just pasted it from my clipboard, which is not such a bad idea because everything is now available at your fingertip with Microsoft GitHub Copilot or also with ChatGPT. Okay, so you got to be able to use it. No need cramming up everything. So there is no startup class. So replace with your startup class. That is my startup class program class. Okay, so that's all. That's actually everything. Now I have been able to successfully build this project with these two class files, and then let's click on test and let's see what happens. Run all tests. So that's absolutely everything I would expect. So two tests. Okay, build succeeded. Let us run this test. Now this error, at the time of starting test discovery for tests run, it said that could not find test host. It is recommended to reference NuGet test adapters in each test project in the solution. Okay, so this error occurs because our test project is missing a test adapter package, which is necessary for test discovery and execution. So to resolve this, I need to add a couple of NuGet packages. I have included these two packages. So I have got this one, xunit.runner.visual studio, and also I needed Microsoft.NET.test.sdk. Okay, I added to the NuGet packages collection. So these are all the packages that is referenced. Now let us rebuild our solution. Let us clean the solution and rebuild it or build it. So build 1 succeeded. Now let us try. So all tests have been filtered out in this view. One error is still there. One passed. So guys, if you see, this is the test that it passed in the myAPI test class. This is by using the web application factory. But on the other hand, so in this test server, myAPI test with test server, this fact test failed. And what is the reason? It says that, system.invalid operation exception, a public method named configure production or configure could not be found in this integration service demo.program type, because we have got this program class which has got minimal API. So it is looking for a startup class that that used to be the convention, which used to have two methods, configure and configure services. If you are coming from ASP.NET Core for the last few years, now it has been all merged together to one single file, and that is creating the error. Now, in order to solve this error, get around this error, I need to do a bit of a change, which will be, we need to add a bit of structure to the program class to allow test server to detect the setup. Okay. Now, either there are two options. Either we should create a startup class in a conventional way prior to ASP.NET 6 and create the configure services with the iService collection, type passing services to the collection, and create a configure method for middleware. But I don't want to do that because I am happy with my minimal program setup, program file. So the other way around is to change how the test server is set up. What these changes are. So before I discuss the changes, let me show you what the changes are. This is the var builder object. I'm calling the new web host builder and then calling the configure services and chaining the other method. Also, I'm chaining these two methods. Now, for those who have come from an earlier version of ASP.NET Core, used to having program file and the startup file as separate files, you may be familiar with configure services and configure methods in the old style of startup class. So basically, I am simulating the same thing. I am chaining the configure services method and the configure method to the web host builder to simulate a virtual startup class within the our test my API test with test server constructor class. So I will get rid of this, but first of all, I will run the test and show how it works or not. It is already worked once. So it's already built, and then if I run this test, you can see both the tests have passed. So this is also ticked, and our other, this is also. So both the tests passed. All right. So basically, this is the end of this lecture. But before I leave, just a couple of things. I will just clean it up. Cleaning up big time, because two earlier attempts to use the minimal API configuration hasn't worked. So I have to rework it to change these methods to create a virtual startup class within my main test class. All right, because I'm happy to use with the minimal API program class, which works fine with the web applications factory. Now, what I did is, which I just told you in brief, with web host builder, this approach uses web host directly instead of web application, which I have kept earlier. Okay. Now, this web application, which was the code earlier, which was the previous code, bypasses some of the automatic configurations that cause issues with the test servers, and I have used the routing and endpoints directly. Instead of using map get directly on the web application, we define the endpoints inside the app.use endpoints and app.use routing. Now we place the map get routes inside the use endpoints to align with the test server's configuration model. Okay, so that's about it. So we've been able to successfully demonstrate the test server configuration as well as the old style of doing it that we have adopted in this course throughout, that is web applications factory. And let's go over what is left. This is the same code which I've just discussed, my API test with test server with a fact test. So I have created two assets. One is to check not null, another is to check if the content contains value 1. Alright, and then web applications factory versus test server, we have already seen this difference. Full applications pipeline testing, automatic dependency injection, and test server is the usable way of doing things, lightweight and customizable and useful for isolated pipeline testing and when to use each tool. Okay, so that also we have seen. Use web applications factory for end-to-end tests with real services and middleware, and use test server for lightweight testing scenarios or where custom configurations are needed. And then finally we conclude that in ASP.NET Core, both web application factory and test servers are essential tools for integration testing. Each tool has unique advantages depending on the test requirements and setup. And both, as I have demonstrated in this project, both are able to stay together harmoniously and test the carry out the fact test with XUnit.